My next guest I had the privilege to sit down with is a friend of mine whom I met 9 years ago back in March of 2015. He's a TV writer, producer, dancer, archivist, and journalist. And so within this episode, we discussed his career in TV and film. We discussed trans representation, the importance of trans storytelling. We also discussed in great detail ballroom and ballroom culture. He is also an author of an up and coming book. This episode was jam packed with good stuff, good information, and just a really good conversation between me and a friend. So I hope that you enjoy. Hello and welcome to Dem Bois Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Aaron, he, him, his, and I will be your guide throughout this journey on the show. This show is a platform where trans men of color voices will be amplified as we share our stories. Trans men of color are not monolithic. What that means is our journeys are not the same. We come from different backgrounds. We have different stories, family relations, chosen family, and most of all, we have different transition journeys. Visibility equals possibility. I like to say that all the time. We like to highlight on this show trans men of color businesses and entrepreneurs, parents, athletes, survivors, and many other issues and topics that are relatable to trans men of color in our existence. Dem Bois Podcast is not only a platform to amplify our voices, but to raise awareness and conversation around our lived experiences. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting, listening, and sharing the show. Welcome to Dem Bois Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Aaron, he, him, his. My next guest is a TV writer, producer, dancer, archivist, and journalist. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hello.
Yes, hello. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself for folks?
Sure. My name is Sydney Ballou. My pronouns are he, him, his, and girl. I always make sure people don't forget that because it's like, no, you're not misgendering me. I'm one of the girls. I hang out with all the girls, so I might as well. I joined the party. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here. I'm so excited to see you, Sean, thriving, shining. Grateful to be in conversation with you and to share this space. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you here. And so, for folks that don't know and that's listening, me and Sydney kind of have a past and we kind of know each other from the past. So, you want to tell folks how we actually know each other?
Yeah. I mean, it's so crazy thinking about we're almost coming up on 10 years, but 9 years ago we did Brown Boy Project together and we were the first Las Vegas cohort that they had. And for folks who don't know, Brown Boy Project is obviously this incredible retreat for folks who are masculine of center, queer, many trans and non-binary folks, also folks who aren't those things. And it was just a holistic retreat that I know for me was incredibly life-changing as far as really stepping into owning my masculinity, owning my transhood, all of the above, and just really setting me off to have a better future. So it was great to meet you there. And obviously, we've kept in touch since, have had our moments of celebration and long chats and so on. So it's great to
Yes.
see you though, thriving in this platform.
Yes, it's amazing. And also the Brown Boy Project was a place where I kind of grew up. And almost 10 years ago when you met me, because 10 years ago I transitioned. It's like a very low point in my life. And the Brown Boy Project kind of like resuscitated me and brought me back to life. So to know that you were part of that journey is such a privilege and a happy for me to have you here. So thank you so much. So
You're welcome.
yeah, so where are you located?
I am in sunny Hollywood, California, in Los Angeles.
Yes.
I
Yes,
love
my
it.
my neighbor to the south of me. So yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I like to ask the guests like, so your name, Sydney, how did that name choose you?
Oh my goodness. We are going deep in, Sean. How did that name choose you? I mean, that's such an interesting question. Okay, the lore, at least from what I was told, is that my dad chose my name.
Mm,
Because apparently my older sister, that was a compromise with my parents, but Sydney was, I think, like my dad's choice. He was kind of trying to go for a French theme, which is so interesting because I did end up becoming this like crazy Francophile growing up, but that wasn't the cause necessarily. At least I wasn't consciously aware of that. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for it. I love it. It's a very symmetrical name because I spell it with two Y's. I love that it's named after a city that is like very easily recognizable. And I'm also very grateful that it's a unisex name because I think I found out certain people thought my name was made up, but no, this is actually my bio name. Like I have not changed. Like I changed my gender marker on my passport and my driver's license, but like it's literally like I even kept my middle name, Leia. I love my middle name. I don't
Mm.
really see any need to like gender affirm it or whatever. I'm like, no, Sydney works just fine. And it's kind of fitting that, and also it's kind of great that I work in Hollywood because there's so many famous Sydneys like Sidney Poitier and Sidney Pollack. So I feel like I'm the third great Sydney in this space.
That's kind of cool. So you know dysphoria around your name. How do you take that as far as like keeping your name from your birth name? And was there ever a need to change it?
No, I mean, I'll sometimes use Sid, although I really try and keep Sid. Well, one, I was anointed as Sid Extravaganza. Um, well, even before it was an extravaganza, when I was in the ball scene, my former mentor, Deja, formerly Deja La Perla, she passed a couple of years ago. I remember when I was at the early stage of my transition, this is maybe like a year or two right after Brown Boy. I was in New York doing oral histories for my master's thesis at that time, and that was the foundation for what's my book right now about ballroom history. But back then, when I was like first interviewing icons, legends, pioneers in New York, I remember Deja was like, "And you're gonna be Sid." Like Sydney was too long and that like Sid would be this like character kind of. I to be fair, like growing up, I would sometimes use Sid. I was a band geek. I used to play the saxophone, played the sax for like 15 years, and I was known as Sid the Kid back then. That was kind of like my nickname. So Sid has always like lingered, but it's never been like proper um like name. And actually, if anything, I like to rail against it because I think sometimes when I offer that, like people just assume that like I'm strict of like I need to have a one syllable name because that is the trans trend of the Kais and the Shawns and the Shanes and and I'm like, no. We could also have two syllables or more, God forbid, as trans mess people. So I also really like holding on to Sydney. I also found out, remember one of my old professors at Penn told me that I didn't know that Sydney also, because like for him, it's a very waspy name that like the Sydneys, and I think also the way that I spell it. I don't know if that was intentional. I mean, I do know the way my parents are. They were definitely trying to protect me as far as like getting access to, you know, whatever more privileged spaces and, all that kind of stuff. So, especially with my dad with the French thing, it's probably was like lingering in the background of like, let me give my kids a bougie name so they can get ahead in life. But if anything, I think what's really benefited me is the fact that it is a unisex name. And I guess if there is this middle class or upper middle class connotation, I'm sure it opened doors like without me even knowing.
Mm.
Because I'm pretty certain like my name on a resume doesn't really convey necessarily like again the gender or if it has this other connotation, I guess it's something else. So
Mm.
can't complain. I don't know. I've always loved it.
I don't appreciate you talking about trans mass folks having one syllable names. When you said Sean, I'm like, wait a minute. I did not do that on purpose. Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
beautiful name, but it is a trend. It's like
I think
moose,
you're right.
bear.
Now you make me want to think of should I change my name? Because I need more syllables in my name, damn
No,
it.
own it. Be that one syllable. Be it. Maybe that's like the way you reclaim your masculinity. You're just like, there's only one syllable.
That's funny. So, Sydney, just share with us your transition journey from wherever you want to start up until where you are now in life.
Oh wow, these are great questions. My transition journey. I mean, it's so hard to say when do things begin, when do they end. Also, it's kind of great because I'm obviously thinking about these things with writing the book right now of just like looking back at my life and thinking about moments that were most meaningful to me and stuff like that. I mean, I also obviously with the discourse around trans kids in the media, it obviously makes me think, and I think for a lot of us who have transitioned when we're older, you think back to your youth of like, if I had access to what these kids have access to now, would I have transitioned at an earlier stage? Would I be one of these younger kids who's begging their parents for like hormone blockers and who's like, let me be the boy that I am? Um, and I look back, I think I would have. Like, I think I would have been smart enough. I would have been on the internet the way the kids are today. But that wasn't the case in the 90s. It's like we didn't have access to that. I know I didn't have access to that. I grew up in a very Catholic, fairly conservative home when I look back. Like my parents voted left, but I feel like their personal politics as their people, like my mom was not a feminist. If anything, that was very frustrating for me because I remember just wondering, like, why aren't you a feminist? And I was a tomboy growing up. I very much loved to play sports. I grew up outside Chicago, so it was all about basketball, the Bulls, all of that. And that was kind of like who I was. I felt like I didn't really have a sexuality, or maybe I was like hiding it, or perhaps it was incredibly repressed because I grew up Catholic. Because for me, my journey was like I first came out as a lesbian when I was in college, my freshman year, and that was the identity that felt right. This is early aughts, 2007, 8. And like, I felt like, oh, I discovered something. It was like everybody else knew I was like a flaming dyke. Like so many of us were like these little butches, like walking around trying to like please our mothers in these dresses and perms that don't make sense. Make it make sense. I know,
Yeah,
Sean.
I looked a mess. I know it. I could just visualize how much a mess I looked. So
Right? I
yeah.
know. Ugh. But luckily those years are behind us. And then yeah, that made sense for a very long time and I loved it. It's so hard for me because actually I've been really revisiting some of these memories, like these butch memories that I had from that time in my life. Because like back then I used to have this habit of like, okay, this is what my friend Emmanuel would call it. I used to turn out a lot of straight girls, it would be like, for whatever reason, I was like always dating these like high femmes who never had dated a woman before. And like, I used to feel ashamed that like back then that it was like some sort of kink or like shame or, whatever performance of masculinity that was not good or something. But then now, especially with the book and reflecting on my life, I look back and I wonder, or was it that I was always a man? Maybe I was always a boy, and maybe like that is also what these people were connecting with. And, or better yet, I take it even a step further because I feel like what we know about the gender binary and just like the intense diversity of what sexuality means, what is straight, what is gay, what is queer, what is lesbian, what is any of this stuff. Like these words are also imperfect to actually describe the multiplicity and expansiveness of our human experiences. So there's a part of me that's like, maybe none of this shit really has a name, or like at least we can't really name it in the present. Um, but really for me, the breakthrough moment, because it was like, I love being a dyke. I was cruising through that, did the androgynous thing. I feel like my era that you saw me in was like I was in the dandy era
The
to
dandy era.
2015, my little bow ties, my little cute little crop top, little short haircut. And it was like cute. And I remember like I was playing with gender a lot. And then it was actually when I was in the ballroom scene, like I joined the ball scene when I was living in Berlin. I lived there for about 2.5 years after graduation. I was doing research on a fellowship. I had like this whole other life back then where I was working in public policy and specifically interested in environmental justice, eco justice, and I was looking at environmental policies in Germany since it's at the forefront of that issue area. And I fell into the ball scene, as you do, and I started walking balls in Germany and then in Paris when I moved out to Paris to start this master's thesis or not thesis, sorry, master's program in urban planning because I'd been working in research right like 2 years before then. Um, And I thought, okay, maybe it's time to get this master's thesis or master's degree.
Hey, this is Sean Aaron. I'm the founder and executive director of Dem Bois Inc. I am also the host of Dem Bois Podcast. As you may know, Dem Bois provides financial assistance to trans men of color in order for them to obtain gender affirming surgery. We have great news. We're currently looking for volunteers to help support our programs. Our programs include our gender affirming surgery grant program and also our personal care package program. We personally curate packages filled with personal hygiene items. Just to name a few, things like tissue, soap, towels, toothpaste, and toothbrushes. We mail them out to trans men of color across the country who may be in need of help caring for their personal hygiene needs. We are looking for volunteers to help raise funds to support our programs. Also, we're looking for someone locally to the Bay Area to help us put all of the care packages together. If our mission is something that resonates with you and you would like to help support our work, just let us know. You can send an email to hello@dembois.org. That is HELLO at DEMBOIS.org. And we will get back to you with further details. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the next episode.
And it was when I was in Paris that I really got deeper into the ball scene. And I remember right before I was going to go to London for the second half of my master's, it was like 1 year at this university called Sciences Po, which was in Paris. And then the second year was at the London School of Economics in London. I met you when I was doing that first part of that program. I was still in Paris. And I was waiting for my visa to go to London. And then all of a sudden, it was like my visa was rejected. It was so annoying. They needed like very specific documentation that wasn't made apparent like on their website. And I was kind of like in this weird holding period in Paris where I was supposed to be in London. And there was this ball that this guy in the ball scene was throwing. This guy, Charlie, he threw this back to school ball. And on the flyer, there was a Butch Realness category. And I was like, oh snap, what is this? And I remember at the time I was in the House of Ultra Omni, which is like one of the older houses in Ballroom. And my mother at the time was this woman, Marina. She was based in Amsterdam. She was originally from Finland with a Russian background. And my kind of like elder sister who was in the house is this woman, Caroline. She was based in Paris. And they were like, Sid, this is your category. This is for you. And I was like, oh, and why? Because it was like, since it was a back to school ball, all the categories were school themed. So this was like a schoolboy realness for butches, i.e., butch lesbians. So like cis women who identify as lesbians. And you had to bring it in French. The word was like a racaille, which in French basically means like a thug or like a boy from the hood, like a bad boy. And I had been boxing because I had boxed when I started in Berlin. And then that was always my calling card as I moved to different cities, is I would always find like the boxing gym because I was like always home base in a way. It's like every boxing gym is kind of the same. It's like a church. And I used to go to this one place called Boxing Beats that was like in Aubervilliers, which is like a little suburb north of Paris. And it was very black and brown, Muslim. You know, for me, it was really affirming because it was the only place in Paris where I saw men of color in positions of power. Just because like Paris is like insanely racist and like white supremacist, where it's just like there's so few people of color who have positions of power in that country. And especially not at the fancy pants university where I was studying at either. But I knew these people. I was like, okay, yeah, I've seen them on the subway or on the, on the metro and the RER. And I basically rocked this look. I was really proud of it. Like, it was like great. And mind you, this is before athleisure was like big because the only people who were wearing athleisure were dudes from the hood in Paris and me. Because I basically dressed like an American college student. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to wear sweats and Adidas sneakers and my little bomber jackets and shit. And it's so interesting because like I used to get stares on the metro. People look at me like I was gonna rob them or some dumb shit. And then of course, like, wait a couple years and when Kim Kardashian's wearing that shit, everybody buys it, I guess, or whatever. But I wore this look. It was like I had my pen sweatshirt, a Bears jacket, gray sweater or sweatpants, and my Adidas sneakers. And I remember my mother, Marina, she told me, she's like, all right, so when you get to the middle of the, keep your hood up and just walk out. And then when you get to the middle of the runway, pull the hood back to reveal your face. And so I remember Charlie, he called out of the mic, anybody walking 10, 9, 8. Nobody was coming for it. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And Sean, let me tell you, that moment, it was pure gender euphoria. Like it was so crazy because I remember once I started walking, people were already clapping. Like it was already applause. And then I got to the middle and I pulled back my hood. And even the judges panel, imagine you, this is Paris. The girls are shady. Like it's already that they're French and then they're ballroom, and then they're black. It's just like shade on shade on shade, And so like to see those people stand up for me, go up for me in that moment was like huge. And it's interesting because I didn't win that night. Like some other trans, well, I think now they're trans mass, but other butch stormed the runway who had like walked this category a bunch of times. And, I tried my best to battle them and I lost, but I felt like I won that night because that's what was my Pandora's box. Like after that, it was like, oh, that feeling. Ooh, I could be a man. Oh, I can do this. Ballroom was really my trajectory and my vector in. And then what took it to another level was I had seen this web series from this trans guy in the ball who was in the ball scene named Seven King, who did his web series called Eden's Garden. And for me, that was huge. It was like that, and then also seeing Teak Milan, because Teak Milan was doing a lot of media and a lot of press around like 2015, 2016. And I remember seeing an interview with Teak where he talked about how how much he loved being a lesbian, how that was very important to his formation as a person. But then like trans just was something on top of it. Like it was something that added on. So it was a way of not like discrediting that time in his life, but rather seeing it as like a continuation on this larger trajectory. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. I was like, that's I see myself. And then when I saw Eden's Garden, the thing was when I had moved to London, I was in queer trans communities, especially QT BIPOC spaces. But I think because I was abroad, I just saw these people as like, okay, these are British people, they're other, I'm American, and I didn't really feel like I saw myself. Also, people of color, like we don't all look the same. I feel like there's a particular British and especially London aesthetic. And whereas when I saw Eden's Garden, that's when I felt seen because I was like, oh my God, these are incredibly hot Black and brown trans men. They're gorgeous, first and foremost. And I didn't realize it was possible to look like that. And not only did I not know it was possible, I didn't even know that I was allowed to want to look like that. Because I remember I was like doing therapy at the time. It was like my first time really being able to access therapy because I was in an English speaking country and I felt like that was a lot easier. Also, I found a service that allowed me to do it for free. And it was so funny because when I did the intake, it was like they paired me with this white guy. And at first I was like, what the fuck? And then it was like, it turned out he was trans. And then it turned out I was trans. And I'll never forget Sarah. She's like such a sweetheart. He was like so British, middle class in a certain way. Like he was just like so sweet and so awkward. And like he kept he kept encouraging me to go to this place called it was in Soho, which in London is like the neighborhood, and it was called Clinic Q. And at Clinic Q, it's something akin to like Aperture or Town Lord in New York or like the LA LGBT Center. But like they had less like actual services. Like I feel like Town Lord is like, all encompassing, same thing with the LA LGBT Center. This I think they were looking to scale up. But I remember going, I just did like a STI check just to be like, okay, cool, get to know the space. And then on their intake form, you could like tick this box to get information about transitioning. So I ticked it, and then this like white trans lady floated in. It was so great. Like it was like I'll never forget. She was like this blonde lady, and also very British middle class. And she was like, so, and I couldn't tell. She just like couldn't tell which way I was coming or going. But she was like, um, what is it that you wish to achieve? And I remember just like laughing at the idea of gender as achievement. Like I would never think, like I wasn't thinking about it in those terms. And I was like, I don't know, just in my mind, I was like, well, I'm trying to be a man. I'm not. And then she's like, well, do you want muscles or, do you do you want facial hair? And I was like, oh, okay. And then like it was crazy because it felt like ordering a pizza. It was like, I want, a mustache with a side of anchovies and extra hot sauce. Just like it was so crazy. And yeah, and then like realizing that you can ask for that, realizing that you're entitled to that. That was like my first time doing that. So, and then from there, I'll just say, just to get us back, but I was trying to access trans healthcare in the UK, which was such a mess. Honestly, NHS is such a mess. And I was like also getting tired of London at that point. It's very expensive. I'm way more of a New York person. I had a very hard time justifying it to myself. And also, I had so many trans friends in New York. I was like, you know what, screw this. I might as well go home. I'm ready to go back home. And that's when I literally set up a meeting with Count Lord to start HRT. Was seen within a week of arriving in the city, and then I started T literally like 2 weeks after getting back to the US. So that was really the beginning of my journey, at least on that trans front.
I love that because I think me and you kind of have the same things to focus on. So you said Eden's Garden and you also said Teak Milan. And so those were two things around in those years that I was focusing in on too. I had already started to transition when you met me. I think I had transitioned 2 years prior to us meeting, so 2013.
Oh, well, only two. You seemed
Yeah.
like you were like light years ahead of the rest of us. It's so funny.
Nah. And so, but I remember T Milan because I was like, yo, that is a handsome man. I was like,
Hmm.
before I transitioned, I was like, I hope that I could look like that. I think that was like my first
Mm.
thing. And I just never knew that. I was like, I could go from looking like this or being this to being handsome like that. I want that in my
Mm.
life. Right.
Mm.
And I had no idea that it was attainable. And if anybody knows Teak Milan that's out there, I would love to have him on the show. I'm just gonna put that out there. So, but I wanted to go back though because you were talking about ballroom and ball
Mm.
community, and so I recently just had somebody ask me 2 days ago, prior to us talking
Mm.
to each other, what was ballroom culture, and I was like, wait,
Mm.
what? I didn't even know how to explain it because this is not this person that asked me is not because I had made a reference to ballroom. I think I had
Oh,
said
okay.
something. I had said something. I don't remember what it was specifically. And she was like, "What is that?" I was like, I had to stop. I was like, "Wait," because I'm so used to talking to queer and
Oh,
trans
yeah.
folks. And so it was like, wait, you don't know what that is? And she was like, no. I was like, wait,
Mm.
you never saw, Pose or you never saw any
Mm.
of these shows? She was like, no. I was like, oh my goodness. I didn't even know how to explain. I was overwhelmed with just trying to explain.
Aw.
So I would like for you, because you're a seasoned person with this
Hmm.
topic, for maybe somebody that's listening, please explain ballroom culture for folks who don't know.
Yeah, this is a good question. I am seasoned. I have sasson. A lot of that. Yeah, so ballroom is, I always like to think of it as a community of competitive artists or artistic competitors, where there are balls that are thrown, and these are places of competition where people in houses, which are kind of like families slash teams, compete for cash prizes and trophies in different categories that relate to fashion, dance, music, art in different ways. And the tradition goes back to the 19th century in New York City and has a history in New York because basically in the 19th century, there were these masquerade balls that middle class fraternal societies would throw. And back then in this Victorian era, you obviously could not be queer, overtly queer or trans the way we understand it. But at a masquerade ball, right, where you can dress up and wear kooky costumes, that's where people like us were able to exist. So these events started to become really popular and really attracted both like straight and queer trans people because for the straights, it was like, ooh, I want to see the show, right? All the queens coming with their big old wigs and interesting outfits. And, this question of who's a man, who's a woman, we don't really know. And then also for our people like us, it was our place to peacock out. We could be ourselves and be loud and interesting and creative. And so what happens throughout the 20th century is this ball culture starts to grow. It has its own history and trajectory in Harlem, specifically at places like the Hamilton Lodge, or which was like a really big basically, it was a Black fraternal society organization that used to do balls way up in Harlem. And these were literally, we're talking like lines around the block, thousands of people going to this basically banquet night that was technically a fundraiser, but would have a show where you could see the gender bending happening, what we would consider drag. And at some point, queer and trans people start doing their own functions, and that sort of takes off. And by the time we get to the 70s, this is where ballroom kind of becomes what we know it to be. Because originally it was just meant to be a meetup for trans women or femme queens. So people, again, and this is kind of hard because as an LGBTQ archivist, it's this kind of thing of like, well, what do we consider, like it's hard to name people in the past because the way they saw themselves as far as their gender and sexuality is very different from the terminology and the way we think about these things today. But, people who we would today consider to be either drag queens or trans women, they used to host these ball functions where they would just meet up and their admirers would come, and then eventually by the 70s, a group of mainly Black trans or Black femme queens. These are the mothers who you see in Paris is Burning: Avis Pendarvis, Dorian Corey, Pepe LaBeija, Crystal LaBeija. I think I said Paris Dupree, right? They start doing their own functions, and this is kind of what ushers in this new era. And so that culture has grown exponentially since then, and has had many mainstream moments, like the most famous, of course, being Madonna when she did the song Vogue, and she worked with Jose and Louis Extravaganza, who were her dancer choreographers from the ballroom scene, to teach her how to Vogue. But yeah, today we see the culture definitely up and through pop culture with, Beyonce's tour and all of her music from the Renaissance album, or Taylor Swift had like Cam, who was like a member of our community who was one of her big dancers who brought voguing to the Eras tour. You've seen it on Legendary, Pose. It's just been this vibrant culture, really a space that was created by Black LGBTQ plus folks to celebrate ourselves.
Hey, this is Sean Aaron, the host of Dem Bois Podcast. Are you enjoying the podcast so far? Great. I'm glad that you are. Would you consider donating today to help support the continuation of this podcast? As you know, this podcast aims to serve as a platform to highlight and amplify the voices of trans men of color and share our transition stories. The podcast not only aims to amplify trans men of color voices, but it also raises awareness around our lived experiences. You would like to donate? Where can you donate? Great. I'm glad that you asked. Link in our description will take you directly to Network for Good, whom we've partnered with in order to collect donations for the podcast. Or you can visit our website. On the website, click the donate button, and from there, you are able to donate directly to the podcast. All donations are tax deductible. What does the donations go to? Oh, I'm glad that you asked. Your donation will help to support our production costs. We are working with Jasmine from Pink Lady Productions that brings you this awesome content. And also, we pay our guests an honorarium. Pay our guests an honorarium? Yes, we do. Why? Because as trans men of color, we would like to support and uplift each other and honor the time that's given out to come here and share their stories. So if you love this podcast, share and donate. See you on the next episode. Take care. Thank you for that quick little history lesson. I didn't explain it as well and eloquently as you did, though. But I was just like, go watch Paris is Burning and you'll get the idea of what it is. So I don't know if she watched it or not, but I was like, just go watch that. And in actuality, I had never seen Paris is Burning before. I was new to what Ballroom was myself until back in 2015. We were at our I was going to say purgatory, but we were at a home away from the home where we had our cohort, but we were getting ready to be shuttled to the airport, and Paris is Burning was one of the movies we watched while we were all sitting around waiting and eating.
Really? Yeah, oh my God, I don't remember that. Wow.
You don't remember that? Yes.
No, who put it on?
I think it was you.
No way.
I'm
Oh my God, that's
serious.
such
I don't remember,
Aries
but
energy. It's my Buffalo bullshit. Wow. Did
yeah,
not
I think it
know.
was you. Yeah, yeah. But that was my first time actually. I mean, I knew what it was, but I had never actually watched that movie. So,
Wow.
yeah,
Oh, I love that I brought that to you guys. That feels very on brand.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure some other folks had already watched it, but for me, it was something new for me. So,
Mm,
yeah.
cool.
So speaking on Ballroom, I just want to kind of like pivot over to like your career in TV and
Mm.
film. And so you were a co-executive producer on HBO Max Legendary season 1 and 2. You want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I had mentioned, my ballroom journey started in Europe. I was a club kid. I mean, part of why I was in Berlin. I love house music. I was there for the party. I definitely danced my heart out at all hours of the night. And I fell into the ball scene because I remember when I lived in Berlin, my roommate, I had this like non-binary pole dancing roommate. We were kikiing about Paris is Burning one day, and they go, you could take like a voguing class here. And I was thinking, God, this is the whitest place on earth. Why would voguing be in Germany? And then it turned out there was this Afro-German woman, Georgina Phillips, who was from the dance community and basically had gone to New York, fell in love with ballroom culture, voguing, and wanted to start a scene in Berlin. So she threw the first ever ball in 2012, Berlin Voguing Out. I did some workshops, really loved voguing. I mean, I do what's called old way performance, which is like the original style of voguing. So that's the stuff you see with Madonna or Paris is Burning that like, has its roots in Egyptian hieroglyphics and breaking and martial arts and all these different dance movement forms. But it's all about shapes and poses and stuff. And yeah, I was just always interested in the history because I think for me, there's something about my old soul spirit that was just always kind of into that. And I remember when I was in London doing the second half of my master's, at the time, because remember I was in urban planning, I was like thinking about going to New York, and this is like right after Hurricane Sandy, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll do this like impact evaluation about hot rebuilding. And then I was like, Sid, if you go to New York, you just want to Vogue. Like, let's cut the crap now and just figure out how to do that. And it was that. And then also the fact that I got invited to talk on a panel about Paris is Burning. And it was for this really big wig professor, this woman, Sarah Ahmed. She's like a really big name in gender studies. And she was at Goldsmiths and doing like a class where she was showing queer and film. And I was worried about like, oh no, what if I don't have all the answers? If somebody asks a curveball question? And so I reached out at the time, as I mentioned, I was in the House of Ultra Omni. I reached out to my father, Kevin, and he was based in New Jersey. He had been in the scene since the 70s. And he just said a whole bunch of stuff on Skype that I had never seen anybody write down. I was like, my goodness, who's documenting this? And mind you, at the time, I was kind of bummed or pissed, really, because I had found that as far as ballroom and academia, there were so many people writing about ballroom culture, Paris is Burning, in gender studies, women's studies, critical studies, but none of these people actually talked to anybody from the scene. And I remember just thinking, like, that is so fucking lazy. We live in the information age. You have no excuse. You can literally Google people, and it's not like ballroom people are hidden, it's like it's not that hard to reach out to somebody. But that's the thing. Academics, oftentimes are not the kind of people who, will leave the ivory tower, you know? And I just was like, I'm sick of this. I want my community's voice on the books. I want people to be heard. So that's when I started doing this project, which is now the foundation of my book, which I did an oral histories project as my master's thesis. And I asked icons, legends, pioneers, take me to a part of New York City you think is most relevant to the history of the ballroom scene and tell me about the space. And so I was doing oral history audio interviews with an H4n Zoom, walking around New York. If you're from the old school, it was about all about Harlem. If you're from the new school ish, let's say late 40s, 50s, it was all about the village, Christopher Street, Washington Square Park, the pier. And I just learned so much history. And I wrote the thesis and felt kind of like this postpartum where I was like, what do I do now? And then it was like a friend was like, oh, you should do a PhD. And I was already, I wanted to transition by that point, was ready to move back to the US. I applied for programs. got into this program at the University of Pennsylvania in their Africana Studies department. And I had done my undergrad at UPenn. And I felt like, okay, I know these professors. Maybe this will be a safer space for me to transition. Obviously, I was terribly wrong. They were truly the most transphobic people under the sun. And I had a truly, truly awful and incredibly violent year. And I had top surgery that year as well. And I just could feel like, okay, this is not a safe place for me at all. Also, at that point, that fall of 20, I guess this is 2017, there was a trans student of color in the law school. And I didn't know him. He was stealth, so he wasn't out, but he was outed as trans, and unfortunately, he unalived himself. And I heard about this through a friend of mine who was in the law school, is like this Black queer woman. And I just remember like I was already dealing with a lot of violence from students, from faculty. It just felt like this is such a dark and awful space. It wasn't what I remembered as an undergrad. And then this terrible thing happened. And I remember my grad advisor thinking I was overreacting, and really trying to belittle my experience. Oh, yeah. I mean, this woman's violent and vicious and just decrepit in so many ways. And then also that same year, I was asked to speak at Trans Day of Remembrance at the LGBT Center on Penn's campus. And I was told by the director at that point, Aaron Cross, that I could not mention the student's death, even though it A, greatly affects me, B, um, the university said nothing publicly to students about what happened. People in the law school knew what happened, but there was no public announcement.
Wow.
Oh yeah, and Penn already had like so much blood on its hands. There were like a number of students who had committed suicide like every year, and it was like such a dark place where people just saw that as normal and were just like, oh, these people can hack it. They're the problem, you know? And like literally Penn, oh my God, like don't even get me started, but like a year or two after I left, um, the head of the student services for like psychological services, which is like therapy at Penn, unalived himself. And it was like,
Jeez.
yeah, there's
That's heavy.
something foul stench in the state of the University of Pennsylvania. Like something is unwell here. And I remember I was told I couldn't mention that student's death. His name was Justin Hermano. And I was told that it's because Trans Day of Remembrance is about homicides, not suicides. And I
Wow.
was told that, right, as if this university didn't kill that child, as if this toxic space, as if these toxic people, you know, like what does it mean if a student can't be out as trans, you know? And, you know, this kind of gets to a larger gripe I have where for a lot of trans masculine people, our pain and our suffering and our humanity is even from trans and queer people is oftentimes diminished. And we're constantly being juxtaposed to the plight of allegedly the most oppressed trans women of all time, as if these two truths can't coexist. That, you know, like there's homicides happening and there's suicides because we live in a fucking toxic like world that says that like trans men or masculine people don't deserve to exist.
Right.
And I do think it's exacerbated by the way even the LGBTQ plus community and trans community also seeks to like diminish our visibility or ability to have or take up space. And there's kind of like this like double bind with patriarchy that we're specifically placed within, where for those of us, I mean, number one, I just think I truly will stand on this that being assigned female at birth is a particular type of violence, gender violence. And it's something that I think a lot of AMABs, those who transition will like experience because like they're going through all the shit that I went through as, you know, a kid where you're being judged on your looks, you're told you're not a woman enough, you know, you're told you're ugly. Like everything I experienced as a butch lesbian that was like so violent around gender is a lot of what trans women, trans femmes I know and see experience, right? And yet that experience somehow gets erased for us because we're told, oh, it's easy for you. It's easy. You're a man. You get all this privilege. And I'm like, where? Like,
Right.
you know, I mean, if anything for me, I just get a lot of especially if people know I'm trans, which obviously I'm out about, like it's part of my work, my practice. Um, then all of a sudden I turn into Miss or, she, her, and you're just like, huh, where did that come from? That was never part of the conversation somehow. Right. And not only that, but then it's also like how I'm talked to, how I'm treated.
Mhm.
Right. Even, or I would say even especially in the LGBTQ plus community, like, it's very, very rare to find people like me, especially in the spaces that I'm in. And, that question of respect is not always there. Um, but I digress because I think to your original question, it was about how did I end up on Legendary? Well, I told all that story about doing this research because I thought I would continue it in the PhD. I left one because I knew in my heart of hearts I didn't want to be an academic. I looked at the writings on the wall. There was no future money wise or any wise, for that profession. Also, I knew I had to get the hell out of Penn. It was a toxic space. And I was like, oh, this is the kind of environment where they will destroy you and say that you asked for it and say that, you're unhinged, you're the problem, whatever, instead of like this place is fucked up. Like something is wrong here. So and also I really wanted to work in the business. I wanted to work in Hollywood and I didn't know how. So I started doing informational interviews, friends of friends, alumni, anybody who worked in the business who would talk to me. And my really good friend, my friendtor, my adoration, Chloe Castellan, I love you. She was my saving grace because she was a screenwriter in the WGA. She had written a script with her writing partner that got to like a very high level of the Nichols Fellowship, which is like a really prestigious fellowship from the Oscars. And basically she gave me the tools. She was like, writers write every day, read scripts, you could do this, there's diversity fellowships. And she was just basically the plug, was just like, if you have the discipline and the drive and the grit, you can do this. And that year, when I was pivoting out of the PhD, I had applied for, it was like the Blacklist macro. They had a competition. I had an idea that got to the second round. And that was my vote of confidence. It's like, okay, I could do this. So moved to New York, had zero money, was working on this idea. I came back to the oral histories. I was like, I know I want to keep doing oral histories of Ballroom. Had met up with this guy, Eric Marcus, who's amazing. He has a podcast called Making Gay History. And he was like, Sid, you should write a book because he's a journalist. And in the 90s, he had done oral histories with the Gay Liberation Front. So people started to pass away because of AIDS. He wanted to make sure their stories weren't lost. And then years later, he cut those interviews as a podcast. And so he's like, you should totally do a book. That way you can get money to do your interviews. And then, in the future, if you want to do something with the interviews, that's always an option. And so I was like, cool. So I started working on a proposal, took a meeting with had taken a meeting with HarperCollins. They were like, you should raise your profile, write more articles on the topic so you can really show the world you're an expert. And I wrote a piece for the New York Times about realness. And I talked about my experience when I just told you about in Paris and, the politics of it. Also, there was like a debate in the ball scene about, hey, do we need this category anymore? There's been so much progress. What does this mean? And that article went viral and it landed me on Legendary because the showrunner of the show at the time is this guy, Josh Greenberg. He was like, hey, called me up. He was like, we're doing this new game show on this new platform called HBOMax. It's about the ballroom scene. And, it's easier for us to train somebody who's already a writer who comes from this world about how to write for unscripted TV rather than the other way around. Would you be interested? And mind you, at that point, I was trying to break in. I was trying to break in on the scripted side, but I, called up Chloe, anybody else who I knew who worked in the business who I talked to, and I was like, what do you guys think? And they were like, go for it. This is your big break. Get a lawyer. Glad I did that. And I worked on the show. So we did season one. We were actually in Connecticut. We built the set inside of an old Fujifilm factory building. And I was doing this in the same commute from Brooklyn, which is crazy to get out to Stanford. And literally our last day of shooting the show, the last episode of season one was literally the day all productions in New York stopped because of COVID. And we all went to hibernation. We got picked up for season two. The show moved out to LA. And then that's what brought me out here. And then, I ended up pivoting into scripted after working on season 2. But that was kind of how I ended up on the show was, it was just like I already was doing all this research and the interviews and, I knew I was going to do a book, and then this opportunity kind of came my way and it made sense.
So we have reached the end of this episode. I want to say thank you for listening to Dem Bois Podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Sean Aaron, he, him, his. Be sure to visit our website at dembois.org. That is DEMBOIS.org. If you would like to connect with us, be sure to follow us on Instagram or Facebook. If you think you would be a great guest on the show, or if you know somebody you think would be a great guest on the show, there's multiple ways to request to be a guest on the show. First is you can go visit our Instagram page, click the link in our bio, and from there you'll be able to request to be a guest on the show. Or you can visit our website, click the programs tab up top, scroll down to podcast, click the podcast button, and from there on the podcast page, you'll be able to request to be a guest on the show. Yo, we need questions, y'all. If you have those burning questions, a question that you want to ask me or a future guest on the show, there's multiple ways that you can send in questions, right? So first, you can go to Instagram, DM us that question, or you can email us at hello@dembois.org. That's HELLO, like hi, at dembois.org. Be sure to like the show. Be sure to share this show out with your friends and other folks in your networks. So until next time, take care.